hello and welcome to Polity Matters. My name is Ben Ratliff, and I'm joined, as always, by Jared Nelson and Scott Edberg. And we are here pretty quickly after the end of the 51st General Assembly in Richmond, Virginia. And as we always do, as you come to find on Polity Matters, we're here to give hot takes, immediate reactions. We're excited to work through a few of the things that happened last week and just kind of process a little bit out loud with y'all, work through some of the decisions that were made, some of the debates that were unexpected, some of the awkward interactions that we had with some of you at General Assembly. This is all kind of being thrown together on the fly, so I don't really know what's happening or where we're headed. But we're glad to be with you, and we were glad to meet several of you last week. I wanted to say, just before we get started, we were encouraged by the number of y'all that came and approached us last week at General Assembly and encouraged us in our work on Polity Matters. It is good to know that what we're doing is not just going into empty space, but is helping to educate some of y'all in matters of polity in the PCA, and also just keep you refreshed from week to week on how we do things. Looking forward already to next year in Chattanooga, I've had a couple of people tell me in the last week that they're pretty sure we can drum up enough money to do a Polity Matters sponsored ice cream social at Clumpy's in Chattanooga. So if you're interested in helping sponsoring an event next year, I don't think it would cost us very much, but none of us have any money. So we would need a little help, and we could make an ice cream social happen, since apparently it's just fallen off the docket of the General Assembly in general.
We're actually hoping that RUF will be a gold tier sponsor of this event.
Of our particular event.
Yeah.
Well, Jared, I think I'm going to just hand it to you. You've got experience as a chairman of a special committee at the GA, and now that you've stood in front of the whole assembly, there's nothing more to be afraid of. Everything will coast from here on for the rest of your life. No more worries, no more troubles. Will you walk us through a few things, and we can talk through some of what happened?
Sure. Everything's simple after that. I thought I would just go through some of the things that happened. We can't go through the entire thing, and that's for the stated clerk and the AC office to make a report on afterwards. But go through some of the things that happened that were notable, and just get your thoughts and ask you if it was surprising to you, or hot takes or whatever you want to do. So I think first up is one of the first things that happened, of course, after Steve Dowling was elected moderator, who I think we can mostly the people that I've talked to have said he did a good job. But after that, we voted on BCO amendments. There were 3 up this year. All 3 of them were approved. But were there any things that were surprising to you? Any thoughts on approving those 3?
Yeah, when listening to the clickers weren't working and at the time, and so it's kind of hard to gauge the assembly. And so Steve Dowling, I think the most notable thing for me when listening was actually hearing the voice vote. And there was a very energetic minority on that, so much so it was kind of hard to tell if the amendment even prevailed. And so when we were sitting there, it was an overwhelming minority. But after we stood up, it became obvious that it was probably like a 65-35 kind of split of the assembly. And that kind of surprised me. I thought the amendment would pass by a larger a majority.
Now, are you talking about item 1 with title?
Yeah, item
right
1.
Okay.
Yep, yeah. Sorry. Thank you for clarifying that. The other 2 passed without any discussion, and so I should have started my thought on with that description. But I thought since it passed the assembly last year by like 80%, the presbyteries by 80%, the overall raw votes were like by 80%. I thought perhaps we would have the same reflection, but it seemed that the debate concerning our Korean brothers was pretty salient enough to lower that threshold from 80% to what I would think is like around 65, looking at the room as it was standing.
Yeah, it was really surprising to me. I think that some men found it an appropriate time to stand up and declare their I should be so bold to say their disobedience to our book. When we had a couple of guys stand up and argue. Well, one guy especially tried to argue for female deacons from the Bible. Another guy stood up and basically said, this is going to go against the practice that we already have, which is that we ordain or commission women to the office of deaconess or deacon. I think y'all correct me. I think a third gentleman at least stood up and referenced the fact that they don't ordain anybody to the diaconate, but just commission men and women to the role of servant or deacon. So it's interesting to me that they stood up and sort of objected to passing this item because it would put them in conflict with the BCO, when the truth is that if they're practicing those things they described, they're already in conflict with the BCO. So it didn't make a lot of sense to me why they decided then to stand up, especially because this is not so much a matter of who can be ordained to office, but just simply who can be given the titles of the ordained office.
Yeah, some of the things that were being said were things that were addressed in the women's ministry report.
Mm-hmm.
The women's ministry report talked about, the fact that you need to be ordaining your deacons and that you shouldn't be presenting those who are not ordained as deacons. Although the women's ministry report also said, there's been this practice of having deacons assistants or deaconesses that were unordained that were serving alongside. And I think some churches that read that report went in a much more of that direction. And it's almost as if some of these guys are saying, we haven't read the women's ministry report. And I would just commend people read that. There's a lot of good thoughts on there that item 1 wasn't doing anything different than what the women's ministry report had actually suggested.
Jared said this the way that I should have said it, but much more kind and tender. It's worth noting on item 1 that there was a protest filed. Was it Thursday morning they stood up and filed a protest against passing this action or this amendment? And
it started as a recorded no vote, and I think the protest was it read before the entire assembly, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he read the whole thing.
It was. Yeah.
An interesting part, and this will dovetail with that, is that led to abbreviated discussion on answering protests. And so, like, getting back to item 1,
did you say abbreviated?
That was a kind way of putting an extended discussion on protests. And so we readdressed item 1 on Thursday during the overtures report. It's like we'll never see the end of this overture kind of thing. But we had a debate then on whether it should be normal for response of the assembly when it relates to protests. So in last year's assembly, you might remember that when we were debating an issue, I believe it was the Metro New York issue with a 40-5, there was a protest lodged by T.E. Coffin, and then immediately after there was a motion to have that protest responded to by the assembly through a commission, and they did. And so I think that there's a seeking to normalize that practice, but it seems that the assembly will judge how it wants, case by case. But that led to a kind of a refresher between going from the main overture debate to overture 1, which was probably the heated part of our assembly.
All right. Well, having covered that, I think we can also talk a little bit about the other thing that took a long time in the assembly, which was RPR, Review of Presbyterian Records. Actually took a lot longer than expected. There were several things that were pulled out of the omnibus to the point where I think David Coffin was thinking about practice in the future that you need to give some notice so that he can find the page numbers. But anything about that particular items that surprised you or surprised you about the RPR debate?
What was interesting to me was that typically presbyteries go back and forth with RPR for a little bit before doing what happened. And most of the items that were taken out were first time just here now. So they didn't go between back and forth with RPR. Usually gridlock is what causes further debate on an issue when you have an unresolved response. And I think it was helpful during that debate that it was made very poignantly by teaching elder Greco that just because someone is cited for an exception of substance doesn't mean that it'll be unresolved. It could be resolved really easily with an email from that presbytery next year to RPR, where the RPR will find its response satisfactory. Instead, we were trying to find satisfactory responses, it seemed, on the floor of GA on what RPR is at liberty to cite as an exception of substance. This isn't citing someone to appear before a court like a subpoena or an ecclesiastical citation. This is citing something of substance just to hear more about it, to learn more on what the issue is from the presbytery. And it seemed to me that the assembly was trying to debate whether RPR had the liberty to cite certain things or not for more information. Because the reality of what would have happened with those issues that we removed and referred back, RPR would likely have found most of those things satisfactory after hearing back from the presbytery. But instead, we had to spend an ample amount of time debating them.
Do y'all think it shows maybe some misunderstanding of RPR, at least from those who were seeking to pull out the exceptions from the omnibus? I mean, if you really, like you just described, if you understand what's supposed to happen, you probably wouldn't do something like that. But it seemed like maybe there were some. At least I didn't recognize a lot of the guys that were pulling stuff out. It seemed like new guys, fresh guys, maybe overestimating what an exception is, not fully understanding or grasping the purpose of the RPR report. Jared, what do you think?
Yeah, I would love to see where that first round of exceptions, that it comes from the presbytery first, because we don't have the information in order to judge the debate. Some guys wanted to say, hey, we shouldn't be cited for this. And the means by which you do that should be in your presbytery when these come up, to say, send a response to say, here's why this is okay. Because at General Assembly, we don't have the minutes. We also don't have, they write clerks' notes to send to the presbytery to explain it further. And we're being asked to make decisions without seeing those things. I had a plan that if somebody else was going to do another exception, to go up there and say, I don't know the details of this, and neither do you, and let's just let this play out. But it started to calm down after a while.
Yeah.
How many presbyteries do we take out? Like 12?
A lot.
Take out everyone.
Yeah. Well, next up, there was a nominating committee.
May I say, the chairman of the nominations committee just did a fantastic job this year. I mean, I haven't paid a lot of attention to the chairman of this particular committee before, but this year, just chef's kiss. I mean, superb job. Well done. Wonderful blazer on. Very, very good job.
I've seen better.
It was I mean, he completed that report in record time too.
Well, that's maybe something to comment on. Is it was only a 15-minute report, partly because we only had like 7 floor nominations. So maybe that's why a few more of the floor nominations got through. If there's 17 of them, you don't have time to make your decisions on them. This time, some more people, I think, read through it and said, well, I'll take this guy or I'll take that guy. So there were actually some floor nominations that made it through where that hadn't happened in the past couple of years.
Y'all can refer back to our deep dive on NomCom if you want to know the details of how all this works.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious on why there were so few. Is there a trajectory in the PCA where it's like, was it even worth floor nominating someone because most of the guys that are recommended by NomCom are disapproved, so why bother? I mean, when I was talking to guys privately who were wondering about running, they're like, is it even worth putting my name in? Because it doesn't matter, it seems, because we'll just go with the nominating committee. Perhaps those who are nominated buck that trend and maybe we'll encourage more nominations in the future. But why do you think that we had so few nominations?
I think it could have been the past couple of years, floor nominees don't really get through. And so it was almost like a reverse self-fulfilling prophecy, that they said it won't work. And then when there's only a few, people actually have time to look through and make their decisions on it, versus a huge number that you can't make it through.
Usually that's my favorite report because it's like a lightning round and you always wonder, am I going to win this vote? You know, like, did I vote in the majority? I love it. It's like a game show to me. And so
Did I choose
I
right?
was disappointed. I was disappointed that there were only 7 votes. There in previous years, there'd be like 15, 16 votes, and it's exciting.
There's also congratulations in order when it comes to the nominations reports. One of our own has been elected the grand poobah of the PCA indefinitely, right? Is that what we got you to? I forget.
Yeah. I'll serve indefinitely.
What are you, a member of the administrative committee now?
Yeah, I was voted as a member of the admin committee through 2028. And so I have 3 years to serve the denomination. I expected a floor nomination against me, but it seemed that no one was nominated.
You won't even be 28 by the year 2028. That's fascinating.
Dude, you're right. I'm such a child. I'm gonna be like the youngest guy I'm gonna be like the youngest guy in the room by like 10, 15 years or something.
Well, as long as you know how technology works, we keep you around. So
yeah. That's all you need me.
All right. Well, and there were quite a few overtures if you want to look at some of those. Five that I thought maybe are worth noting that I think got pulled out of the omnibus. There was the overture to declare the statement that we wrote last year as biblically faithful, which was taken down from encouraging people to send out more letters just to say, yeah, it was good. Any thoughts or surprises on that?
I can give a window into the overtures committee. We originally answered overture 13 in the negative. We had worked on it for a few minutes, and it seemed that there was enough resistance. And it was not a close vote, but it was an overwhelming negative vote against it, maybe 71 to like 40 or something like that. And then the next day, when we reconvened on Tuesday morning, uh, there was a motion to reconsider that vote, and that included striking all of the resend the letter language and to instead just commend the report. And so after that, we had, I would say, their vote almost reversed the other way. And so it was satisfactory enough to the guys. But it was an interesting debate because it was one of those few times that a motion to reconsider, it's hard to do that, pull that all off well. And the man that led that did a really good job at that.
Well, if there's nothing else on that one. There was also an overture that came to do background checks. In fact, I think there was what, six or seven
Mhm.
overtures that came asking to do background checks. This one surprised me a bit, but I'm interested to get your takes on it because they took it from being a BCO amendment and then made it a GA recommendation, and that ended up passing the GA. So, any thoughts or anything you found surprising about that?
I do think the one aspect of this is that this has an immediate result instead of taking time at the presbyteries and then coming back next year. That it's just an immediate statement of encouragement. I forget the exact wording. Was it strong encouragement? I don't know what came out in the long run. Um, so we see it today, right? Like it's done today instead of having to
Yeah.
wait for it to be
It,
adjusted.
it became be it resolved that the presbyteries and sessions are encouraged to adopt policies for conducting background checks on every candidate for office.
Yeah, and a good clerk would announce that at their next meeting when they're updating on the work of the assembly, letting them know that this is one of the actions of the assembly to us.
Mhm.
They commended us to adopt policies, and so a good clerk will inform his presbytery or even the pastors their own churches that this is one of the actions that they asked us to consider. And so I think it was not all for naught. In the overtures committee, that I only have really I stopped paying attention after overtures. I think that's how it is when you're on overtures. You just stop paying attention after. But it was originally answered in the negative, and it was the substitute prevailed to answer it in the negative. And there was another substitute which pushed it to at least commending it. And so it was we spent a lot of time debating the issue in overtures. We just spent almost 15 minutes, does not compare to the amount of time we spent on this overture in the actually OC. We spent a lot of time on this overture trying to figure out how to do it. It wasn't a language issue. There wasn't much to massage in the language department. I think it came in as a really substantial overture that didn't need much overhaul. And so we didn't massage the language. We were debating extensively the efficacy and the difficulties therein. And so we started out in the negative, and this is perhaps the middle ground where we commend the actual act. The Overtures Committee was worried that if we did not commend it, it would seem to be that we were saying that we were not encouraging
Mhm.
background checks. And so, in order to perhaps safeguard against that idea, we sought to commend them at least.
Do you think we'll see something on this again? Because this has an immediate effect, but if there's those that want to see something in the BCO, do you think this says, well, this basically has done what we want it to do? Or do you think there's going to be any more efforts to try to get this into the BCO?
The number of margins on this issue, in the Overtures Committee at least, obviously we don't know the Assembly. They were substantial enough to where I don't think there can be anything passed. If you're trying to constitutionalize something, there's a lot of work that would need to be done to change the mindset of the overtures. It was like a 70-30 issue when to answer in the negative 60-40, 70-30. And so there was a substantial majority. And I think it'd be hard to undo that. You'd have to almost go back to the drawing board and figure out a whole new way to do this, just because of how the votes shook out. And so I don't know, maybe, if there's a will, there's a way, to send up another overture. I just don't know what would change if the same thing was sent up again.
Yeah,
It had to be
probably would just be
rewritten.
whether or not it's has a language of mandate or like this, which is encouraged. I'm just surprised that they didn't try to put this almost exact same wording into the BCO.
in the book.
But
Yeah.
yeah, but well, we'll see. Another item that was pulled out that had a lot of debate around it, which maybe was a bit surprising, was Overture 3, which was constitutionalizing BCO 53, which is on preaching. This would take one of the chapters in the directory that is not doesn't have the force of law and give it the force of law, slightly modified. And this one passed Overtures Committee, but failed on the floor. So any thoughts on why that is, or if that was surprising to you?
After this happening, I've had some conversations with folks suggesting that there's two issues at play with constitutionalizing this part of our book, and since I know that my co-hosts probably have little to no opinions on this matter as a whole, it's probably best for me to speak to it. We're dealing with constitutionalizing parts of the directory and chapter 53 in particular here, but also amending it. And so this came as those two things in one overture, making some amendments, and even Overtures Committee had added an amendment, some lines to change towards the end of the chapter, and also granting it constitutional authority. I've had men say the reason it didn't pass is because we need to deal with those two things separately. And as far as procedure goes, I don't know. In my own mind, I think it through and I think, well, what's the point in amending something that's not constitutional by itself? And then on the other side of it, it's going to be hard to constitutionalize something that needs so many amendments. And so it seems, in my mind, necessary to do both of those at the same time. I'd be interested at some point to hear from the guys I've talked to that are suggesting we do them separately. I don't know if y'all have thoughts on how to accomplish that. I'm surely giving away my opinion on this, that I think we should have constitutionalized at least what the Overtures Committee presented to us. But it's just an interesting conundrum. We've got guys that would like to see it made official, and then guys that would be willing to do that if it was amended substantially. But just how to go about that seems to be the question at hand.
There was almost no wordsmithing of this on the Overtures Committee. We only amended from the proposal from PD 53.6. We rewrote 53.6 in its entirety and simplified it and made it positive. And we did nothing else. I thought it was going to be death by a million amendments kind of thing, because what we had a few years ago when we were dealing with marriage was that idea where we couldn't agree on every, section of the BCO. And so we just got that little section on marriage itself. And I thought that's what would happen here. But instead, there was very little debate outside of 53.6. And the commissioner who wrote the revision for it did so in a way that it kind of ended the debate on the whole thing. And there was no more debate at all. And maybe that's where the weakness in the idea found itself. I thought perhaps the less amount of revision, the easier it passed, but I don't think the Overtures Committee even thought of the idea that ruling Elder Donahoe brought up with shalls and shoulds and all of that. And so I think there was a catching off guard. I wonder if there's just maybe we misunderstand the assembly itself and the presbyteries. Maybe there's just not any desire to constitutionalize the DBW. Maybe there's a desire to keep it completely open and free, and maybe that's where the PCA is. We'll have to see if there's another amendment or another overture for this next year. But maybe there's just no desire for this project to be ever finished. And
the
if that's
margin was
case,
very narrow. Sorry, Scott. There was a 49 vote margin, so it only lost by 49 votes or 50 votes, I guess technically. And most of the men were in the room. So what tallies up to 1,900 and anyway, about 1,900. So there were only a couple hundred guys that might not have been in the room or whose clickers weren't working.
Yeah, I think the fact that there's multiple elements to this, multiple moving parts. Howie Donahoe got up and spoke and pointed out that, in fact, if you're wanting to make sure that only men are preaching, it already says that in BCO 12. And that was because of a previous time in which that happened. And so I think that kind of took the air out of we need this in order to prevent that. It's like, actually, we have the tools for that. Now we're just talking about, is this helpful to us? And people perhaps weren't there yet. And I think the shoulds and the shalls debate uh, revealed something else about the nature of the directory. Most of the directory actually should be shoulds. They are mostly advice and directive of like, hey, don't preach too long and make that crowd out prayers or sacraments within the service. And so there's somebody else that was saying, am I going to be brought up in charges for that? It's like, no, but if you're coming in for the first time as a pastor, isn't this helpful to you to read this of like, this is general good wisdom to take into mind. And so I think we need to understand the nature of the directory a little bit better before we get into trying to make chapters constitutionalized, because I think too many people go at it as just, this is a list of rules. And the directory typically has been this is good guidance. And there are a few shalls in there, but most of it is actually shoulds. So that's my take on it.
And maybe that's a good jumping off point for amending it before it's constitutional. It's just that argument you just made is that this is good advice and it's encouraged in BCO 12 to follow it. So if we're going to try to follow it, let's at least make it the best we can, and make it a teaching tool in a lot of cases for interns and candidates that are coming up.
Well, a couple other overtures that came up. These are two that actually went the opposite directions that I thought they would go. So I was not super surprised that O3 failed. I thought it might pass the GA and then fail in the presbyteries, but these next two, I did not expect them to go the way they did. That is first, Overture 1, which was, and you take it with Overture, I think 18 or 17, that would have allowed atheists to testify, or those that are not professing to believe in God and a state of future rewards in the church courts. And that ended up failing to go through, even though it was amended and wordsmithed that it was better than what it came in as. So, and you guys have any thoughts on that? Was that surprising to you?
Yeah, I was surprised. I thought the wordsmithed version, the substitute for the minority, was substantially better than both Overture 1 and 18 originally. And I shared that with the author of it. It was the superior overture. One of the issues that it originally fell into is that it tried to do too much, and that's why I thought it would fail. But seeing the revision, it did what it needed to do in a really elegant way. And hearing the minority report, the presenter of the minority report did such a good job. I was sitting there in my seat thinking, this is going to pass the assembly. I don't think this would pass the presbyteries. I can get into the analytics as the analytics guy. But you need more than a supermajority of the assembly to affirm something for it to actually pass the presbyteries. At least that's kind of the rule of thumb. And so I never thought this would pass the presbyteries, but I thought it would pass the assembly. I thought it would pass by a slim majority. And that was, again, another 49%, 50% issue.
That's about where I am. Jared, you probably have thoughts.
No, I thought I was really actually impressed with this section because it was done as a minority report. You had ruling elder Trevor Lawrence and you had teaching elder Steve Tipton. Steve Tipton bringing the Overture Committee recommendation, Trevor Lawrence bringing the minority report. And I was just really impressed by the fact this was a substantive debate. Hey, this is not all pathos and this is not all emotional. This is really trying to get to the substance of it. So I was actually really pleased with how the debate went, where at the end I was like, we're actually going to vote on this on substance. And that's great. So my commendations to both of them.
Yeah, the first 30 minutes on that debate were the best, in my opinion, overall in quality. And it was all substance. And that's kind of what you need, in my opinion, and when you're presenting a minority trying to sway the majority, not mere pathos, but substance. And I thought Trevor did a good job of that. And I think Steve did a good job as well as for representing both positions. I'm curious on whether this will be tried again. there seems to be, in my mind, there's no consensus, and it's a principled issue, not a language issue. And so for two assemblies in a row to hit this so closely, we would need substantial movement, in my opinion, for this to actually not only pass the GA, but the presbyteries as well. And I just don't know if there is that consensus or if there could be that consensus in the PCA. It seems to be there is an even division on this issue. And what I learned from the main line is that even division means no change. And so I wonder if we'll see more of it.
I've heard men from both sides of this issue said that they'd be willing to entertain some kind of common ground on the matter. I don't know what that would look like, but I've heard
it almost
I don't think
a
this is
different
dead.
approach.
Yeah, it'd have to be something else. Yeah.
I will say that debate had the moment that made me feel the most northern at any time in the PCAGA. Cornstarch in the graveyard. I was lost. That was another language for me. But
you got here. I'll share the video in our show notes of teaching elder Zach Bird from Raymond, Mississippi, talking about graveyards and cornstarch and plots thickening. Oh man!
I was just glad that Fred Greco said that. I was like, what does this even mean? I was like, I was born in the North too. I have no idea what's going on right now. But the other thing that happened that was surprising to me that I thought would go the other way was Overture 33, which was from not even a session, but one person that had set up an overture, was rejected by the Presbytery, set it up anyway, and that was to commit Jesus Calling to a study committee. Now, that didn't pass overtures. They changed it to just ask two committees, that is MTW and CDM, to ask their relationship to the book and what they've done in the past in regards to it. But that passed, and that surprised me. So I didn't know if any of you had thoughts on this request on a particular book and a response on it.
It's a much better approach, I think, to ask committees that have potential involvement about it rather than to establish a whole new study committee on it. If there's involvement from MTW or CDM, just ask them. Have an official request. I actually think it became a much better overture after the committee got done with it. I'm still surprised it passed by over. I mean, the margin was over 100 votes. You rarely see it come up from an individual, much less. Rarely see something from a session come all the way up and get approved, much less from an individual teaching elder come all the way up and get approved. So that in of itself was surprising to me.
Yeah, I thought it was dead on arrival from the moment I saw it, which was three months ago or so, whenever it originally was submitted. And I thought it was dead on arrival when I was at Overtures Committee. Even while we were debating the substitute, I thought it doesn't seem like there's going to be a majority here. It's so much easier to say no when it's just one person recommending or asking for something. It's a lot harder to say no, in my opinion, when a whole presbytery asks for something. And so I was surprised that the substitute prevailed. I thought the argument, I thought that the man who made the substitute was prepared to defend the substitute well at Overtures Committee. And I think that's why it ended up prevailing, because the arguments had to be created against on the fly. And what happened in the Overtures Committee is there was more of an argument against the study committee. And so once that whole idea was taken out, there was a rework of argumentation, and I don't think it was able to catch up to the substitute, which was prepared to make that argument of just asking for information from the committees. I don't think the minority was prepared to defend against that. And I think that's why it was so appealing to the Overtures Committee.
Yeah, if you read the original overture, I would not have been comfortable really with that. But the way that they changed it to be like, no, these are actually lower level committees that have some relationship to it. And it's okay to hear just what the relationship is. I don't think some people, even in the media, understand it. There are some reports that were like talking about book banning. And no, that's not what it's about. It's just asking some questions. And so I think this was nerfed down to the point where it was acceptable to a lot of people just to ask some questions. Those seem to be the main things that were happening at GA. I mean, there was the RUF agreement, but it seemed to be fairly non-controversial. No big discussion about it. I commend RUF for getting a bunch of people to look at it and work on it so that it wasn't a controversial thing. So they got the people that had some concerns into the room, and they worked on that, and they got something that everybody accepted. I mean, this is a novel approach. I think some years to actually get people that have problems with something to say, help us improve this, and then we can all present it as our own.
Yeah.
So good for them.
Overall, I'd say,
also,
all of us want to say something.
we all do want to say something. What flies under the radar is we are one presbytery smaller. We are now 87 presbyteries, which does change passage mildly for any amendment because it has to add up to the total. And so we lost a presbytery through a merger. And that was, I don't even know if discussed. I think it may have passed in gross during the M&A report with almost nothing said about it. And so that's perhaps significant in that the Ohio area will change quite a bit as its representation changes.
Yeah. So just a couple other areas I'd be interested to get your takes on. I saw you guys in passing, but not a ton as we were there. Anything surprising or interesting personally while you were at GA that you'd want to share?
I'm still alarmed at how tall Jared is whenever I see him in person. That's all.
What I would commend that was different for this GA from my previous GAs, I brought my wife this year because I was up for a permanent committee and I thought it'd be exciting for her to watch me lose if it come to be it. So she could, console me. But it helped balance my week a little better. I was not up till like 2 a.m. every day because she kind of grounded me. And I think I'm a little better rested because of that. And so I'd commend it because you might be a better human being at the end of it. I was so exhausted last year. This year was a much more balanced experience. And so it's thanks to her for that.
One thing that was surprising to me, and this is worth noting and to commend our moderator, we got done in record time this year. I think we finished, what was it, 3:15, 3:19, something like that on Thursday. But that's even with taking an early lunch. Was it Wednesday or Thursday? We left about 30 minutes early for lunch in the middle of the debate. So and if people had kept their mouths shut on the RPR report, we could have been done before lunch on Thursday. So it was a remarkably well spent time on the floor compared to previous years when, I remember in recent years, we went into Friday morning and very, very late Thursday night, several times in a row. So to beat Fred Greco last year is a big deal.
If you've only been to the past 2 GAs, you are spoiled.
So true. Yeah, you can commend Brian Chappell for that. That was pretty much his work. There was an overture a few years ago that would be to amend the RIO to restructure the docket. And Brian made a plea to the assembly to vote it in the negative and let him have a swing at it. And we did. We voted it in the negative and let him have a swing at it. And he has hit it out of the park every year since then.
Yep.
And so we can commend the clerk for structuring the docket in a way that we aren't up to 1 a.m. rush passing overtures.
Yep.
I like getting out at 3.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
I'd add a personal thing from this GA that was different for all 3 of us was having people come up to us and talk to us about the podcast. So I'd like to also, in retrospect, apologize for how awkward that felt. And so I probably did react the best every time. I'd know what to say. But thanks. It was encouraging. It was actually really encouraging to hear how many people have found it helpful and people coming from all different perspectives. I think it's helpful to have something on content that's not always just on opinions. And I think that's what people found helpful. So thanks for encouraging us. And it was a delight. So anybody else have that experience?
There's a lot of Polity Matter swag floating around out there now, too. Lots of stickers and pens and bottle openers, I think, is what we did this year.
Yeah.
So the reception of the swag was great. So we will try to amp it up a little bit next year. Stay tuned for links for our Patreon where we start raising money for swag for General Assembly, because apparently that's got to be a thing. So,
which is a good segue to maybe one thing we have to address too is, did you get any swag and what was the best? And I do have to commend Birmingham Theological Seminary. I didn't realize it when I picked it up, but they were giving out fountain pens. So that's pretty good stuff. Close second, I think maybe was Covenant and their glasses, Covenant College.
I missed the glasses.
Yeah. Anybody else get any good swag?
Greenville gave out a cool tumbler at their. Of course, we're all showing this stuff to the camera that we are not going to publish, but Greenville gave out a cool coffee tumbler, ceramic coated, kind of nice.
Yeah, all
There were
I
good
got was
T-shirts.
yeah, I got a t-shirt from GPTS, but that I don't think I got anything from RTS. Oh, I got a book from RTS. And then
Yeah.
a bunch of books from GRN. But that's about it. I'm not a swag guy.
And then one thing, I don't know if we want to publicize it too much, but going forward, do you want to tell them what we may be doing then for
What do you mean?
episodes? Oh.
Maybe.
Going forward, like coming up on our show, what we're doing.
Yeah, coming up in the summer.
Yeah, so that's a good point. We should say we might be dialing back our release schedule a little bit over the summer. We've got there's some travel going on between us and just some other projects we've got that we're working on that we need to take a little time for. So you might start seeing episodes every 2 weeks throughout the summer. Instead of just taking a solid break, we're going to release a little slower. We'll pick back up when we get into the fall at our annual renewal, when we kind of get to our year mark, and we'll start coming in weekly again. But Jared had this great idea to talk to other Presbyterians from other denominations about their general assemblies or synods, and kind of just see what's going on in the American Presbyterian world. So hopefully we'll have some of those guys coming on in the next several weeks and give us some reports on what they've been up to. I don't know if you're looking for more than that or not. Is that enough of a teaser?
No, we have some contacts in the ARP, the RP, the OPC. If you know anybody in the Korean American Presbyterian Church, I would love to talk to them. They're like the biggest NAPARC denomination that we have no idea what's going on with them. So if you have a contact, send it to us. I would love to just get an update on what happened at their General Assembly.
I'll put that in our show notes so that folks can be reminded again. You guys know our contact information. I'll repeat it here in a little while. So let us know what you think. Overall, folks have been asking me, in my church, how was GA? And I think my general response is going to be GA was good. I think we had a good week overall. The debates, as Jared already mentioned, were relatively substantive for the most part. Not a lot of pathos going on. There was a little bit of it, but generally men were thoughtful in their remarks, and I'm always encouraged at that. When we walk away sort of looking smart and sensible and logical instead of looking like doofuses who just aired our feelings and grievances on the floor the whole time, that's encouraging to me. And the votes were very close, which I think shows that some of those substantive arguments were compelling for a lot of guys, and they were challenged in how they were voting. There are some good resources out there. I'm going to put links in our show notes. If the guys think of any more, I'll add them in after the fact. But George Sayer, teaching elder, has written a good summary. Ryan Beasy has a summary out there. His was a little more opinionated, but it's still useful if you're interested in what happened. Presbycast had an episode last Thursday night that was sort of a debrief of GA, like kind of live on the spot. That's worth listening to. Of course, I'll link to the Zach Bird video of him talking about graveyards and cornstarch. Anything else you guys would commend to the brothers out there, the sisters out there who are listening, as if they want some material on what just happened last week?
The sermons, especially the ones that I wasn't able to be there on Wednesday because of nominating committee. We meet at the same time, but I really enjoyed Fred Greco's and Joel Kim's. They're both worth a listen.
We would commend those recordings to y'all. I'll put links to the live stream recordings in our notes. Anything else, guys? Any more hot takes? Hearing none, as B.L. Peters would say right now and had said to me many times last week at the assembly, this podcast is over. Thanks for joining us. If you're interested in learning more about anything that we've talked about, do check out the show notes that we've just listed for you in your podcast player or at politymatters.org. If you've enjoyed the show, consider following us on Twitter or Facebook at Polity Matters, and be sure to subscribe in your podcast app of choice. If you have questions or comments, anything you'd like to contribute to our discussions, you can contact us at politymattersfeedback@gmail.com, or you can find any one of us on Twitter, and there are links to those socials in the show notes. Thanks again for spending time with us. Until next time, say goodbye, gentlemen.
Goodbye, gentlemen.
Adios.
Y'all take care.